Hi, my name is Evangelia ALIFIERI, and today I will be talking to you about a new mesowear technique, which is fully quantitative and achieves that by using geometric morphometrics. Before we talk about this new technique, I would like to talk a little bit about here we go. A little bit about what is dental mesowear analysis. So mesowear is a dental proxy first created by Fortelius and Solunia in 2000, and it uses dental material of animals in order to categorize them in dietary groups, and it represents their diets in their lifetime and at least more than 6 months. It uses occlusal relief and cusp shape of the tooth, usually focusing on the second molar. And for the cusp shape, we have 3 possibilities. It can either be sharp, round, or blunt, and the occlusal relief can be either high or low, and it is represented by the ratio of the height between the valleys and the maximum length of the tooth. How that classification happens is that depending on the diet of the animal, so if it's mainly eating grasses or leaves, it has been linked with different tooth shapes. So grazers, mainly feeding on grasses, usually are connected with low relief and blunt shapes, while browsers have sharper and higher tooth cusps. And from that, someone can infer their environments or environments in either closed or open habitats. Now, the reason this methodology has been quite popular and used the last years is because it's quite efficient, both in time and in steps. It doesn't really require any equipment other than maybe a camera and a laptop. It's very easy to both implement and learn. And there have been many extensions and different alternatives of this technique, which have been applied to different taxonomical groups. And lastly, we have extant databases, which can be used to compare with fossil data. Now, as all the methods, it also has its disadvantages. None of the methods so far are fully quantitative, which leads to bias error types. Also, they are scale dependent, meaning that it's hard to identify a sharp shape between the tooth of an alces and the tooth of a rhino because of the difference in size of the two teeth. And also because of the many different techniques which are sometimes focused on particular taxa, it's difficult to compare different studies with one another. What our new methodology hopes to solve is, first of all, by being fully quantitative, it minimizes the bias error types and is scale independent since it uses a procrust for the cusp shapes, which makes it comparable and able to maybe be used in different techniques and then combine the data from all of them. Now, the steps we use are quite simple. So we have a group of animals, species. We take the individual and we take their dental material. We use free software like TPS series to digitalize the cusp shape and also take the measurements for the occlusal relief. After we have gathered all the landmarks for each curve, in this case, we used 40 landmarks. We focus on the 10 highest in each tooth because we want to focus on the tip of the shape. And then using a procrust and a PCA and combining the data with the occlusal relief, we plot the species, which depending on where they are in the plot, it gives us information about their diet and thus we can infer their environment. Now, we used an extant database from Bose in France with animals of known diets in order to test this technique. We have 2 cervids and 2 bovids, and you can see the individual numbers in the circles. So what we took was, for starters, starting from the cusp shape, we see that the mean form, which is the middle in the middle, can either be blunter or sharper. So positive numbers show a sharper shape and negative numbers show a blunter shape. And then we can see on the bottom the occlusal relief. It can be, as we said, either high or low. And then we see the plotting of the 4 species. So Capreolus capreolus, represented here by green, is actually a browser. It mainly feeds on leaves, but we see that it seems to have, in comparison to the rest mixed feeders, the most blunt and short cusps, which was unexpected because usually that type of morphology is linked with grazing habits. So in order to see if it was a problem with our methodology or not, we applied the exact same species with the already established mesowear method by Rivals and Cerberon. And we see that even in that method, the group of Capreolus capreolus seemed to plot as a mixed feeder and seems to be more grazing in comparison to the rest of the mixed feeders. So probably our method is okay, but there is something particular about this group of specimen that could maybe some kind of particular food that results in the teeth being blunter and shorter than expected. We then applied this methodology, having tried and now having a framework of extant species, to a fossil locality, Ierakaru 1. It's located in northern Greece, in the Mygdonian Basin, and you can see the geological map and the stratigraphy of the Ierakaru formation where the locality is present. It was first discovered in 1978 by Emeritus Professor Koufos, and it is dated at 2 to 1.8 million years ago. The database we had, which is represented by herbivore species that are represented by dental material, were 4 bovids, 2 of which, the last 2, were only represented by 1 specimen, which is also juveniles, and are usually not taken in consideration when using mesowear techniques, 2 cervids and 1 equid. So the results we took from this, we used the frozen PCA of the extant species, and in there we plotted our results from the fossils. And if you look at the top corner, you can see a triangle, which is the equid, and it seems to have the bluntest and shortest cusps, usually, as we said, correlated with grazing. And on the other end of the spectrum, the X, which is the bovid, which is a juvenile and seems to have the sharper and highest, indicative of a browser, but usually juveniles, because they do not have enough wear in their teeth, they sometimes plot as browsers without actually being. So if we were to linearize this plot, we would see the distribution of our fossil species from the grazing to the browsing scale. And if we couple the fact that most of them are mixed feeders, and that the bovids and cervids occupy more than 50% of the fauna in Ierakaru 1, we could say that Ierakaru 1 had a paleo environment that was mosaic with temperate conditions. So if I want you to take 2 messages from this presentation, is first that this new methodology, geometric morphometric mesowear, is efficient, fast, it is fully quantitative, which is a first in these techniques. It's very shape sensitive, but at the same time scale independent, which allows also for data comparability, and maybe is a way for us to homogenize future studies in mesowear. Also, Ierakaru 1 had a mosaic environment, so it was an environment mixed by open forest and savanna woodlands with temperate environment towards warm conditions. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to thank the organizing committee also. Are there any questions?
And today I'm going to talk about the riddle of the Szeletian and the problem of leaf points industries. And firstly, I wanted to start with this simplified table of the situation. Of course, I want to add the disclaimer, this is not the all. This was just a way to show this situation. Of course, we have upper Paleolithic with Mikokian. Jankovician is a unit described in Hungary, of course, connected with Neanderthals. We have upper Paleolithic with or Ignatian, Gravetian, connected, of course, with Homo sapiens. In between, we have middle to upper Paleolithic transition, nowadays mostly said more like early upper Paleolithic time. And we have no bone human remains, so we don't know it was made by Neanderthals or Homo sapiens, or both, or under influence of each other populations. But this is the theory, but in the reality, the situation looks more like that in the material. So the borders are not clear. There are many overlapping of these industries or these units. Of course, the most important thing, everything is in question. We're still not sure about some of this overlapping and sharing similar types. But now I will want to go directly to the Szeletian. The problem of Szeletian is mainly focusing about the fact that is known from mostly surface collections, and that the key cave sites are excavated more or less 100 years ago. So we have a problem with dating the site. We have unsure context of artifacts. And as I show in previous slide, the problem of overlapping with other industries is also the result of lack of information about tool production and debitage methods, because we don't know how much of an inventory is homogeneous and only attributed to the Szeletian and not, for example, Aurignacian, Jerzmanowiczian, and Bohunizian, etc. So in the Szeletian, and basically in the Central Europe problem of industries with leaf points, we are focusing mainly on the leaf points. But the problem of the index fossil of Szeletian, the so-called Szeletian leaf point, is difficult. And to explain that more, I have to go to the eponymous site, the Szeleta cave, located in Buk Mountains, here in the northern Hungary. The first excavation took place in the 1906, and a later study actually divided two layers of Szeletian, the early Szeletian and the developed Szeletian. The early Szeletian was characterized by occurrence of not regular, not symmetrical, more robust leaf points, and the developed Szeletian with more elongated, thinner, well-made, symmetrical leaf points. But actually, a couple of years ago, studies suggest that the developed Szeletian is not Szeletian at all. It actually is a Gravetian. But the damage was already made. By that, I mean that we associated the Szeletian with occurrence of many types of occurrence of leaf points in many types and forms. So this is highly problematic aspect to the research of leaf points industries in Central Europe. During my own study on Szeletian layer from Obłazowa cave located in southern Poland, the first excavation took place in 1985. The last one took place in 2018, so recently. Here we have stratigraphy of this site. Here we have the middle Paleolithic layers. Here is the Szeletian layer, also the upper Paleolithic. But what we can see in the stratigraphy that the Szeletian share something in common with the middle Paleolithic layers. It is the use of raw material. They predominantly use of local radularites, and we can see this in these layers. In the upper Paleolithic is different. We see more input of flint. So this shows us that most probably the Szeletian is made also by Neanderthal population. In terms of raw material, we have the spectrum of radularites shown. So we have many colors, some on gray tones, some more gray, also the red type. And in layers in Obłazowa cave, and especially about this Szeletian layer, the red type is predominant. They prefer the red type. We don't know why. It was mainly just aesthetical or symbolic, or maybe some technical aspect that we don't know yet. Of course, some use of a couple of artifacts of local sandstone and one artifact from obsidian. Local outcrops of this material is located the closest to Obłazowa cave in Slovakia area. And the inventory is not abundant, less than 100 artifacts, mostly dominated by retreated flakes, some side scrapers. We have traces of blade technology, of course, the leaf points and fragments of facial tools. We can say most probably or possibly leaf points and small fragments of bone tools. And so this actually shows that this is the inventory shows the traces of temporary settlements. And Actually, a couple years ago, scientists divided Szeletian in Central Europe on the two units, the early Szeletian and the late Szeletian, based on chronology, technology, and typological aspect. Early Szeletian is represented mostly by the Moravian area in here in the Czech Republic. So these are the sites that mostly represented this early phase of facies of the Szeletian, and here we have the dates of this unit. And late Szeletian is represented mainly by the site located in the western Slovakia, and we have only one date from site Morawane Lcha. It was later in time. Ołazowa cave, actually located in here, is not similar to the sites with leaf points in Poland. I say site with leaf points because sometimes the association with Szeletian is in question, so it's much safer and simpler for now just to say the sites with leaf points. So Ołazowa cave shows similarities to actually the sites in Slovakia, like Trenaszki Teplice Plieszki, Morawane Lcha, or Wilczkolce. And actually also the dates are similar from Ołazowa cave, and they also match the dates from Morawane Lcha. And the similarities are based on raw material. Here we can also see the use predominantly of local radiolarites. Interestingly, in Morawane Lcha, we also see the preference of using the red type of radiolarite. Also, we have local sandstone and use of obsidian. Actually, in previous publication in 2003, Ołazowa cave had some similarities with Czertowa Pec or Dzierżawa Skala, less than Morawane Lcha or other sites from this late Szeletian. But actually, these sites right now are associated with Mikokian, with Middle Paleolithic, not with Szeletian anymore. So we can see that this picture of the situation is very dynamic, and so everything can change after new analysis. So it's quite surprising, and also puts a lot more question. But surprisingly, thanks to Hungarian National Museum in Budapest, I was able to see some inventories from Hungarian side. Ołazowa cave is very similar to Jankovic cave in terms of course of raw material, but some technological aspect, also typological, and also the coexistence of leaf points implements with bone tools. But actually, it is Jankovic cave is the eponymous site of Jankovician, the Middle Paleolithic unit. So this is actually surprising, but it shows that this units described in Central Europe are not, they're overlapping a lot, and there's a lot of question consider this. Although I said that Ołazowa actually is well suited to this variant of Szeletian in Western Slovakia, this late Szeletian, this late unit. Actually, I think, and more scientists saying like that, and I'm agreeing with this totally, that we should actually say that more about technological, typological tendencies in this area, not maybe describing the units, because as we can see in here, there's a lot of overlapping and misunderstanding with this situation. And Ołazowa cave is a very important part of this research because it has context, of course, and although the small inventory and we have the dates, so we are lacking of sure dates from this area. So for now, there's a more question than answer in this topic, but I hope that maybe in the future we will be able to answer some more. So thank you very much for your attention. Here are some more reference on this tangled topic, and thank you very much again.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction, and thanks to all the organizers for this opportunity to share some of the most important results I got so far from my master's thesis. I'm doing my master's in biological anthropology in the Laboratory of Human Evolutionary Studies. in the University of São Paulo, Brazil. And my research project is about the evolution of the bony pelvis in human species and its possible evolutionary relationships with birth. So first of all, I have to tell you a little bit about how the pelvis shape has evolved literally from the Neogene to the Neolithic. And just as other changes that occurred in the lower limbs of hominid species, the changes that occurred in the bony pelvis are interpreted as adaptations for bipedal walking in a functionalistic point of view. And this image on the right shows these morphological changes highlighted in blue, red, and green in a comparison between the lower limbs of a chimpanzee, an australopithecus, and a modern human. But in the case of pelvis, there are other factors that are supposed to have driven some morphological changes, like thermoregulation and birth. And birth is because compared to other ape species, humans have a high cephalopelvic proportion, as shows this figure in black and white. And the cephalopelvic proportion is the ratio between the size of a neonate's head and the size of the mother's birth canal. So, and it is especially high in Homo species, as we can see. And for this reason, there's a lot of controversy about how the dramatic increase that happened in our brains in the last 2 million years of our evolution has affected birth, causing this great cephalopelvic proportion and even shaping our bony pelvis. So in this research, I analyzed the Brazilian contemporary sample of CT scans of head and pelvis, exploring the pelvic and cranial dimensions through traditional and geometric morphometric techniques, and also looking for possible covariations between pelvic shape and the body dimensions listed here, stature, weight, and BMI, that already showed significant statistical significant covariations with pelvis shape in other studies. And what is maybe more interesting, the possible covariation between pelvis shape and cranial shape, as other studies have found this covariation between the parts of the body and suggested that this could be a kind of morphological integration, a developmental integration that was to enabling birth in our species. So the sample I have is a sample of CT scans obtained from the virtual autopsy project that was carried out in a public hospital in São Paulo called Hospital das Clínicas. And we consider this a very valuable sample in terms of representativeness, because this hospital provides care for literally people from all around the country. And as this is the first pelvimetric study ever done in a Brazilian population, it was important for the sample to be representative. And also, as I put in the title, this sample was expected to give some interesting insights about this discussion of covariation and morphological integrations, because the Brazilian population has a highly mixed genetic background, and it may have decoupled some characteristics along the generations. The methods. In this slide, I show how I got the information of shape from the CT scans. So for each one of the CT scans, I made 2 3D reconstructions, as you can see, one for the pelvic bones, another for the cranial bones, and plotted on them the landmarks that I listed in these tables. The landmarks also appear on the surface of the models as these little red dots. And it is also important to mention the softwares that I use to make these 3D reconstructions out of these scans, because they were basically free softwares, 3D Slicer and its extensions, Slicer Morph. And without them, this research, as many other studies in Latin America, would not be possible, because software licenses are sometimes completely unaffordable. So this was a really important thing to me. And just before we move on to the results, I would like to introduce you to some other anthropological issues that are involved in this research, even because it is an anthropological research too. It's not only about biology. And the first is a fact that I think that we all should be aware, which is despite this being a very scientific discussion, Parts of this discussion are being taken out of context and used to justify old misogynistic discourses about birth being curse or punishment or on women's bodies. And we should really worry about these discourses because they're not only affecting discourse, but also practice in what we call obstetric violence. And this problem has several consequences. One of them in the Brazilian context is what we call the C-section epidemics. That has created a problem for this study because it is literally creating fake data about cephalopelvic disproportion in the population, as cephalopelvic disproportion or obstructed labor become a common justification for unnecessary C-sections. And so in this case, in my opinion, I think that the best thing we can do as women scientists is, first of all, to be aware of all these problems, to be very, very careful with the interpretation of our data, and even more careful with the quality of the information that we are providing to the general public to avoid these misunderstandings and misuses of science. So, okay, the first result I would like to show you is this comparison of pelvic and cranial shape between the sexes obtained both by geometric and traditional morphometrics. The interesting thing is that for crania, for example, we found all the measurements taken by traditional morphometrics significantly greater in men. But if you look at the chart of the principal components of cranial shape obtained by geometric morphometrics, you can see there is no clear division between the sexes. They are colored in red and blue, which means that these significant differences were probably effects of size, because in geometric morphometrics, size is not taken into account, it's only shape. But in the case of pelvis, 13 out of 14 measurements were greater in women. And if we look at the chart of the first two principal components, we can see that there is a clear separation between men and women along the first principal component. So this means that there is indeed a difference between men and women in pelvic shape. In this slide, I'm showing again the chart of the first two principal components of pelvis shape with the individuals colored by sex. But now with these two 3D projections around the chart, they're actually the same 3D pelvic model that I warped across the first principal component. So in this case, I'm showing you what would be theoretically expected for individuals in the the extreme points of the first principal component, which would be where these green big dots are. And what is worth mentioning about these predictions, these 3D predictions, is that they clearly show that most part of the variation that occurs across the first principal component is in the true pelvis, which is this internal part of the pelvis that composes the birth canal. And we can see how men and women basically different, they have a divergence in this point. And in this slide, I'm showing you the results I obtained when I tested for possible statistical covariations between pelvis shape and other variables. Actually, the only significant results were obtained for sex, what was totally expected, as sex divided the sample across the first principal component, and also for stature. But it called my attention that, as you can see in the chart below, where the sample is colored according to categories of stature, is that the shortest people tend to be on the right, while the tallest people tend to be on the left. So the shortest people are where women are concentrated, and the tallest people are where men are concentrated. So this covariation, this statistical significant covariation, is probably only reflecting the sexual dimorphism in the sample. So in this case, despite the significant result, chances are that I have found a spurious correlation between these two variations. And as a conclusion, I can say that the results I have are very consistent with what has been found for pelvis shape in other populations around the world. So despite all the mixed genetic background of the sample and the expectations of increased diversity that we had, what was found for pelvis shape, especially for the true pelvis, is very consistent with many other findings. So adding this to the fact that the true pelvis is the most sexually dimorphic part of the skeleton and also the only one that preserves larger dimensions in women than in men, our findings corroborate to the hypothesis that obstetrics has played a role in shaping our pelvis at some point of our lineage. But about the possibilities of modularity between head and pelvis, our results do not support any of these hypotheses so far. And that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think we still have a few minutes. And you can send me an email if you want.